Women and Mental Health in Literature from 1865 to 1945. I will be talking about how women were treated during this time period, how mental health was viewed in this time period, and how it affects today. My name is Avonlea Miller. I will be discussing 3 short stories that I read during this semester. Introduction. The first of the 3 short stories I analyzed is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. In this short story, a woman and her husband go away to a nice house for 3 months in the summertime to get fresh air. The woman starts by having a diagnosed nervous condition or depression by her husband, who's a physician. As the story goes on, the narrator becomes more and more insane to the reader, but not necessarily to her husband. Her husband thinks she is getting better until the very end, when the narrator becomes so crazy that she tears all of the wallpaper up in the room and claims that she is finally free since all the wallpaper is down and they can't put her back. In this story, you see a lot about mental illness, mental health, the progression in her mental condition, and also what it is like to be a husband and wife during this time period. The next short story I focused on is The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin. In this story, a woman finds out her husband has been killed in a railroad accident and becomes crazily upset, goes to her room and shuts herself in, until she looks out the window and slowly starts to realize that this now means freedom, and that she can live by herself now and live for herself. This story is also a really good example of being a wife in the late 1800s and a little bit more about health. The next short story is A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. This short story is split into 5 different parts, and it talks about tradition, death, and Emily's life from the beginning and to the end when she dies. The genre of these are short story fiction, and A Rose for Emily is also Southern Gothic. All 3 of these short stories show that women were not taken seriously, and neither was mental health during this time period. It has progressed a lot in this day and age, and I am quite glad it has. Yellow Wallpaper. Again, this short story is about a young woman and her husband who go away to a little townhouse to get away and get fresh air. They reside in a big upstairs bedroom with a hideous yellow wallpaper that the narrator becomes obsessed with. This wallpaper eventually comes to represent herself and how she feels. Throughout the novel, she starts as just having a nervous depression, but eventually starts seeing things within the wallpaper and ladies creeping around the house and around the yard. This yellow wallpaper advances her condition so much that she eventually becomes completely insane by the end. The themes in this short story are ignored mental health, which is obviously shown by her husband's lack of attention towards her, the importance of self-expression, because the narrator has to always fake herself to her husband and fake getting better. She is not expressing her true self, and because of that, eventually also becomes crazy. This short story also explains what it's like to be a wife in the late 1800s and to be ignored and not listened to as she might be listened to nowadays. The symbol in this short story is the wallpaper. The wallpaper represents how the narrator feels within the story. she feels trapped behind the wallpaper also, and she eventually becomes free by ripping it off the wallpaper and refuses to be put back, as she says in the story. At this point, you can tell that she has completely lost her mind because she believes she belongs in the wallpaper, but now that it is off, she cannot go back. There is a lot of irony within this short story. Some examples is in these quotes. The first quote is, "John laughs at me, of course, but that's expected in a marriage." This is kind of ironic because that shouldn't be expected in a marriage. In a normal, healthy marriage, you would not expect your husband to laugh at you. Another quote is, "You see, he does not believe I am sick." This shows the ignored mental health, since John does not think she's actually sick, even though he's a physician. So at this time, even physicians didn't really believe in mental illness and kind of just thought it was them faking it or not being realistic. Another quote is, "I am glad my case is not serious." The narrator says this after discussing how John is always away on his serious doctor visits, and it's ironic because she herself is serious and becomes completely serious, but she does not think her condition is even that bad. Short story I read and thought related really well to the yellow wallpaper is The Story of an Hour. The themes of this short story are the joy of freedom and being a wife in the late 1800s. Again, the story is about how a woman found out her husband had died in a railroad accident and at first is completely upset over it and locks herself in the room, but slowly starts to realize the freedom she now has and becomes completely ecstatic knowing this freedom exists. In the joy of freedom theme, she finally realizes that freedom is possible for her and she's really excited to have it. The theme of being a wife in the late 1800s is also seen, since her and her husband's relationship is not exactly the best. Some symbols in this short story are heart troubles and the open window. When I first read this short story, I thought the heart troubles meant love or relationship troubles, not physical heart troubles. But I slowly started to realize that I think it means both. That she actually has relationship problems and physical heart troubles as well. The open window symbolizes her freedom. As she's looking out the open window, she slowly starts to realize the freedom she now has and becomes ecstatic. This short story is pretty ironic because at the end she dies at the appear of her seeing her husband again, and it would think that she would be from shock as a heart attack, but is actually because of horror from seeing her husband again and having the freedom that she just got back taken away from her once again. Some quotes I thought were important in the story is, "And yet she had loved him, sometimes, often she had not." This reiterates the fact of being a wife in the late 1800s is not quite that good of a thing, since they didn't love each other back 100%. A relationship like this is not very happy nowadays, and this does not seem like a very happy, healthy relationship either. Another good quote is, "There would be no one to live for during those coming years. She would live for herself." After realizing that she is now free, she becomes completely happy about it and realizes that she can live for herself finally and not live for her husband or anyone else. At the end, she realizes that once her husband is alive again, or still, I should say, that her freedom is now taken away and she would have to live and servant to her husband once again. Last short story that I thought related very well to the yellow wallpaper and the story of an hour is A Rose for Emily. This story, again, is in 5 parts and discusses Emily's life in several different time periods. The themes of this story are tradition. Emily is a very traditional woman, and so is her family, and they were always upheld to a high standard. And also death. This not only being Emily's death, but her father's death, and also Harold's death. Some symbols that are in this short story are Emily's house. Emily's house represents the decay of Emily herself, because the house starts really well, a nice, pristine, beautiful, big white house, and towards the end of the story becomes quite an eyesore and really run down. I believe this represents Emily's mental health, because in the beginning of the story it starts really positive, well, normal. She seems to have a good head on her shoulders. But towards the end of the novel, I really started to become concerned about Emily's mental health and thought she was indeed crazy by the end. Another symbol is the silver toilet set. This symbolizes the love and hope she has for her husband, and gets this set for him and engraves it as well. Finally, the last symbol is the strand of hair. This symbolizes to me Emily's last strand of craziness, because this proves that she lives in a house with her dead husband and still stayed by his side and laid by his side when he has been dead for a very long time. A big irony that was in this novel or short story is the townspeople held Emily to a completely high standard and even made fun of her for dating someone lower than her standard, yet they were the ones that created it for her, and they also resented her for being such a high standard level and traditional woman when they were the ones that created the standard for her anyway. Some quotes I thought were important in this short story is, "Only a man of Colonel Sartoris's generation and thought could have invented it, and only a woman could have believed it." I think this quote reinforces the fact that women were not taken seriously during this time period, and that they were making fun of a woman for believing this quote. Another quote is, "We did not say she was crazy then." This reiterates the fact that they indeed believed Emily was crazy, and so did I towards the end. Another quote is, "One of us lifted something from it, and leaning forward, that faint and invisible, dust dry and acrid in the nostrils, we saw a long strand of iron gray hair." This completely shows the fact that she was indeed crazy towards the end, because it is not normal to be sleeping next to your dead, decaying husband, and this shows that she indeed was, and she probably had for a while. The stories written in this time era showed that women were second-class citizens. These stories showed what people believed mental health was and how to deal with it. Reading these stories this semester has made me realize how lucky I am to be a woman in this generation, rather than ones like this. I'm glad we have come much farther in mental health and feminism, and we still have a long way to go, but I am happy there's progress. It is really crazy and interesting to read these stories during the semester and realize that women were treated so awfully by their husbands. So I'm really glad that I could read these short stories this semester and connect them in different ways that I never would have connected before. And I thought it was really interesting to find out the times from reading the literature from the times. This is also the Works Cited page. We have the 3 short stories that I talked about. I thought it was kind of neat that William Faulkner's publication was in Columbus, Ohio, since that's only a few hours from here. I didn't really know that. So it's kind of neat to see how people live so close to you sometimes.